Ed Goren, of course, a former Fox Sports executive, was vice chairman, you name it, and he dominated the sports space and continues to do today. He joins me on the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, a national anchor at Fox Sports Radio. Ed, I appreciate you doing this. Very much look up to you and your career and what you've done. And I wanted to start here. What does it look like inside John Madden's travel bus?
It was sort of his home away from home. And John could watch football videos 24 hours a day. So being on the bus was just perfect. It was like being in his TV room. And it was, everybody wanted to visit the bus. It was like a landmark for sports television.
That was a landmark for sports television. You are a landmark for sports television. 47 Emmys. Which one of those Emmys was hardest to get?
Probably the first one at CBS. Barry Frank was president at CBS Sports. And, I'd say maybe 3 months into his taking over at CBS Sports, he made a deal to cover a group of amateur climbers who were about to climb Mount Everest. And back then, in 75, 76, the Nepalese government only handed out 2 permits a year to climb Everest. And Barry had made a deal with this group to do a special about their climb. And he called me into his office and said, I just made this deal. I know or hear you know something about film. You worked at CBS News. But I don't know physically if you're going to be able to go from Kathmandu, a trek that probably took about 10 days, up to base camp to do this documentary. And Barry looked at me and said, what kind of shape are you in? And well, I'm not. I spend most nights on the east side of Manhattan drinking and smoking a couple packs of Marlboro Reds. And it sort of went right over his head. He didn't really follow up on it. But his next question was, well, what do you run a mile in? Barry, I don't. Well, back then he used to run a 2-mile run at the reservoir in Manhattan. He said, meet me tomorrow at 9:00. We'll run the reservoir and we'll see what kind of shape you're in. Well, I could always run. And at the end of the run, diplomatically, I let him beat me by a few yards. And the next thing I knew, he was sending me to Mount Rainier for a practice climb, and a month later to Everest. I was nominated for that for an Emmy, but did not get it. The Olympics somehow were in the same category, and I didn't get the Emmy for that. But a year later, Barry made another deal with a group that was going to try to cross the Atlantic in a balloon. And I found a second group that was about to do it, which was wonderful. I could play one group off the other. And that ballooning across the world, whatever the show title was perfect. And we did win an Emmy.
Wow. So that first Emmy led to 46 others. We're joined by Ed Goren. I'm Bryan Fenley. In your own climb up your career mountain, to take a metaphor off what you were saying, what was the hardest bit to climb where you really had to dig in, you really had to dig deep, and where you're most proud of a moment in your career and something you overcame?
Boy, my career had so many pieces to it. So I graduated from Syracuse. My dad was a sports writer, so I grew up in the sports world, so to speak. I was at Syracuse, like half the broadcast world spent their college, not just me, but I was at Syracuse. It was graduation day, and my dad said to me, well, what are you going to do now? And I said, well, you know what? I'm going to be a sportscaster. And my dad said, well, before you become a sportscaster, I think it's a good idea if you could get a job in news and learn how to tell a story, how to write a story. Uh, and I got a copy boy job at CBS News back in the day where Walter Cronkite was doing the evening news. And that was my education more so than Syracuse. And from CBS News, 2 years later, I was working at WTVJ in Miami. And I was a producer. I was shooting news film. I was a street reporter. And I was producing the weekend news shows. And that was my graduate school. And that was the biggest challenge. Probably, if that doesn't happen, who knows what else happens? And then getting back from WTVJ in Miami to CBS News at the time was a huge challenge because there was no guarantee that I'll be able to get back to CBS or back to New York or back to into sports. And then a couple of years later, coming off of CBS News again, a guy named Bob Wussler, who was a brilliant executive producer at CBS News, where he did the conventions, the space flights. He became president of CBS Sports. And I reached out to him for a job at CBS Sports. And it's sort of the rest was history.
You're from Greensboro. I saw you were born in Greensboro. I
Well,
went.
you know what? I was born there. They ran me out 6 months later, but it was good credit when Spock did NASCAR that I was able to say, well, you know, I was born in Greensboro.
Well, I actually went to UNC Greensboro. So I saw when I noticed you went to Greensboro, I was wondering how long you spent time there. But obviously you were there for a short span. And then
My father was in the Air Force and he was keeping North Carolina safe from the world.
big responsibilities that your father had, and certainly when you think about all the people that you've mentored, one of those people has been Jacob Ullman. And he looks at you as someone who changed the course of his career in a beautiful way. What did you see out of Jacob at an early age where you knew that he had what it took to make it in this business?
Well, you never know for sure, but one of the things in this business is it's a people business. And how do you deal with people? How do you work with somebody, let's say a lead play-by-play guy or a lead analyst, where you're the producer? It's your job to on the line, but you're dealing with talent that have their own ideas. How do you work with talent to get the talent on board to your agenda? And that's a challenge where Jake got along with people. He's a people person. So you take his smarts, his talent, but the people part really helped make his career.
He's gone on to do great things, obviously, with Fox. And when you think about the cultivation of talent that you were a part of, obviously, with the NFL on Fox and everything you have done there, where is Jim Nantz's career without you?
He'd still be in Salt Lake City doing local sports. Not really, but that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
That's what he was doing when I found him. Watched a tape of his. That's where he was. Look, talent rises to the top. Jim Nantz would have been successful, whether it was at CBS at that point, where he was only 25 years old or so. He was going to be successful regardless. But I'm certainly, through the years, been so proud of Jim, his career, and the friendship that our families have.
Yeah, Jim, yourself, so much to be proud of. And I saw this. This is interesting to take it in a different direction. The World Arm Wrestling League. How did you get behind that?
Well, once I retired from Fox, uh, you can't just stay at home, spend every day with your wife or on a golf course. You got to do something else. So I did pick up some consulting gigs, and one was the World Arm Wrestling League. We had a good 2-year run until the world imploded a year plus back, and it no longer exists. But the arm wrestling was one of the major sports shows on ABC's Wide World of Sports.
Wow.
And the first show that I worked on for the league, I got to Al Michaels, and he was saying, "Well, what are you up to?" And I mentioned that the World Arm Wrestling League, and Al said, "Petaluma, California." I did one of the first shows I did at Wide World was the arm wrestling show. So I got Al to do the opening for our show with the World Arm Wrestling League. It was a fun couple of years. It's too bad that we had to really shut down because it's really a people's kind of event, and the people who participated were fun and personalities. As I said, it was a fun couple of years.
One of your former
and one other thing, it kept my marriage going. So
how so? Because it kept you busy?
It kept me out of the house, yeah.
Another excuse to get out of the house is to play golf, as you mentioned. And one of your former coworkers, Scott Ackerson, he claims to be a really good golfer. Now, my question to you is he as good as he says he is on the golf course?
Yes, and don't bet against him.
So he's good.
He's more than good. He's single digit.
He obviously was one of the many who you've had such a grand time working with, and just so many people who you've mentored. I would think another one would have to be a guy like Bob Wiley. And what was it like working with him at such a young age and seeing him grow?
It's exciting because you see people develop, careers develop, and you look back and you go, wow, a lot of people came by me. A lot of people came to me. I hired a lot of people. And when all is said and done, you can say, what are you most proud of? I think I'm most proud of the people that I did hire through the years.
One of those people who you did hire was Joe Buck. What did you see in his first tape that you liked, that caught your eye?
Not much. Let me take you back to 1994 and the launch of Fox Sports. We had Pat Summerall, John Madden, and Dick Stockton and Matt Millen as our two lead production teams, but you do 6 games a week. And I felt that those two groups gave us credibility. And I went to Hill and I said, here's an idea. I want to hire a bunch of young play-by-play broadcasters who will down the road be our future. And with a guy named George Krieger, we hired Tom Brenneman, Kenny Albert, Kevin Harlan, and then Joe Buck. Now, I had worked with Joe's dad, Jack Buck, at CBS Sports. And it's 1994, the Super Bowl's in Atlanta. My wife is with me. We're walking down the street in Atlanta and run into Jack and Carol Buck. And Jack goes, congratulations, Ed. I'm so proud of you. where are you going to be based? I said, LA. Anyway, I get cut off in the middle of talking to Jack. His wife, Carol, reaches in her bag and says, Ed, I have a son. We have a son who's a broadcaster. And I said, no, I didn't know that. She said, well, as a matter of fact, I happen to have his audition tape here. Would you get to look at it for me? And my wife quickly jumps in and says, Carol, if he wants any action tonight, he'll check out Joe's tape. Well, Joe Buck's tape, he had never done football. There was no football on his tape. There was baseball and some college basketball. But it was enough to impress me to bring him out, audition with the rest of the guys. And the 4 kids that we hired, and I think Joe Buck was the one who came up with the name of the group. He called the group the Lucky Sperm Club because they all had fathers. Kevin Harlan's dad was president of the Packers at the time, the others broadcasters. And, 25 years later, it's great to look back and see the careers that these kids who are no longer kids had.
It's also great to look back and see the early TV career of Troy Aikman. What did you like most about him at the beginning of his TV career?
Well, I knew him from his days with the Cowboys and my days at CBS, and we did plenty of Cowboys games and playoffs. And I ran into Joe out in Palm Desert, and we ended up playing golf together. And I never talked about broadcasting, but we talked about life after sports. It's very hard for a lot of guys. The peak of their careers is the last game they played on the playing field. The rest of their career, it can be a struggle. It was never going to be a struggle for Troy, but it was an interesting conversation about what life will be after he hangs them up. And while he was still a player, we had the NFL had a European Football League, the World Football League, I think is what it was called. And I reached out to Troy and said, why don't you go over to Europe and do a couple games, see what it's like? And he said, well, can I pick who the play-by-play guy I'd work with? And I said, sure, who is it? And he said, Brad Sham, who I knew. And I said, that's fine. And they go over and they're doing a game in Germany, and we're doing 4 or 5 games a weekend. And I'm flipping from one to the other, and I'm listening to this one. And I turned to it couldn't have been Jake at the time, but whoever it was, I said, who the hell's doing that game in Berlin? And, Troy and Brad. And I go, Jesus, that's great. I tracked them down after the game at a bar in Germany, and I just gushed as to what a great job they did. Well, Troy tells a story that he took the gig because he figured, hey, he and Brad, they get a free trip to Europe, he'll play some golf, no big deal, it'll be fun. Well, that's not who Troy really is. He's not going to embarrass himself. He's going to study the hell out of it and do his best. And doing a World Football League game where you don't know who the players are is a lot more challenging than doing an NFL game. So when Troy retired, there wasn't one broadcast sports operation that reached out to him to hire him. I did, and we did hire Troy. And what was it that the others passed on Troy? One of the things about Troy, he's the ultimate teammate. So in the locker room press conferences after games, he never took a shot at any of his players, his teammates. He would always give the politically coach speak responses. But I knew there was another Troy Aikman who in that locker room was as vocal as could be and opinionated as he could be, and that he could bring that into the broadcast booth. And I hired him. I didn't want him exposed in year one to having to carry a 3-hour game with a play-by-play guy. So I put together a 3-man booth. I think it was Moose Johnson, his fullback, and Troy, so that Troy didn't have to speak after every play. Then he evolved into, kept progressing to where he didn't need any help. He wanted to be in a 2-man booth, and it was sensational. I think a lot of people were shocked as to how good Troy was. The other thing with Troy, that one of the stranger days that Hill and I had, the Barry Frank who sent me to Nepal was at this point an executive at IMG and representing John Madden. And Barry comes into LA to meet with David and me. And the purpose of the meeting was that John has an offer basically to go to Monday Night Football. It's always been his dream. He'd like out of his contract. It's not exactly the news that Hill and I wanted to hear, but in the end, we said, you know what? Godspeed, go to ABC. Well, that's fine, but now what are we going to do? Hill looks at me and goes, that's great, but now what are we going to do for lead team? And I said, well, we have an opportunity to put together a young team that, again, will be the future of Fox Sports for a long time. And that was Joe Buck, Troy, and Chris Collinsworth.
Wow.
And we went through that first year without one negative article about, boy, Fox Sports really screwed up. It's not what they were. And the reason that I had Troy with Collinsworth gets back to the same thing sort of that I was saying earlier. I didn't want one guy, whether it was Troy or even Chris, to be the guy that followed the guy that followed John Madden, because there's only one John Madden. So therefore, put together a 3-man booth. It'll be fresh, it'll be young, and nobody will have the pressure of, well, he's not a John Madden.
How has Troy thanked you all these years later?
By being a great friend. It's real simple. I mean, there are a bunch of people. One of the things that when you retire, what you miss when all is said and done is people, whether it's Jim Nance or Joe Buck or Troy or Terry, Howie, Jimmy. And we had a wonderful broadcast family. We were doing a playoff game, probably in Green Bay. And I don't know what got into me, but I'm with Howie and Terry, Jimmy, and I said to the guys, man, it's hitting weather today. At which point Howie goes, hitting weather? What do you know about hitting weather? You'd have a play to snap. Well, just yesterday on the pregame show, the guys were saying it's cold in LA today. And somebody says it's hitting weather. And Howie goes, Ed Goren. A lot of great people. Absolutely.
A great person as well in David Hill. How did you and David work so well together?
Respect. Here's something that we had the same resumes. We were both production people. with all due respect to other companies, sports operations, where the executives haven't produced any shows, David and I, we were production people. And we were going to be different, and we were going to argue with each other. A couple things. I mean, my best David Hill story, and there are many, and usually most of them took place at bars. But it was July, we're doing baseball, and Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire, they're both closing in, have the potential of setting a home run record. And David, twice during our life at Fox, was away for a couple of years, in this case, overseeing primetime for the network. And I go into him and I say, David, here's what's happening with baseball and McGwire and Sosa. And we got to do that game when the record is set. And he said, what are you talking about, Ed? Who knows? How do you know when? No, this isn't going to work. Get out of here and come back in a few days. But this makes no sense. I come back a second time to him. And he says, look, I got a primetime schedule that I'm launching in September. You're saying that's about the month where this is going to happen. But I can't, I got promotion money and shows that are launching. I can't do it. Forget it. I go back a third time to him. Now, you got to have a pretty damn good relationship with a boss to be thrown out of his office 3 times with the same conversation. And David goes, well, see what the salespeople say. So I get to our salespeople, Jim Burnett. I go, Jim, we could get this in September, and it could be McGwire or Sosa setting a home run record. And David wanted to know if you're going to be, what you could sell the game for. And Jim says, I can't sell that. The ad revenue for the fourth quarter for the new season is already accounted for. So I go back to David one last time. And he said, what did Burnett say? I said, well, he doesn't know shit. He's just a fucking sales guy. He doesn't think he could sell it. Maybe I got the wrong sales guy. So David says, here's the deal. Get out of my office, get our research guy. We had one research guy, sit with him and come back and tell me when Mark McGwire or Sosa, because now it's August, when they're going to set the record. And we go back to him and he says, okay, you beat me down. Go ahead and make it happen. We picked a date. And now I'm in St. Louis. David is in the bunker at Fox Sports. And McGwire's first at bat, he's tied the record. His first at bat, he grounds out to short. The phone in the television truck rings. It's Hill going, Ed, that's great. Don't let him hit the home run until late in the game so that you hold the ratings. At which point, I thought, motherfucking Hill, God damn it. He's going to do it next time. I'm about to hit the vodka. If it doesn't happen, lose this number. Hang up the phone. Next at bat, McGwire, a line drive, barely cleared the left field wall. And there's the record-setting home run. The bat phone rings, and it's as if Hill and the executives at Fox were celebrating Mardi Gras. They were just screaming and yelling as to how did that happen? That's one of many, many David Hill stories. The respect that I have for him, and we worked so well together. We're both in New York, and Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson are having their public divorce on ESPN. And they finish their coverage, and I turn to Hill and I go, I'll see you in a couple days. And he doesn't skip a beat. He looks at me, he goes, check in from Dallas once in a while. And I get on a plane, called Jimmy Johnson, and he goes, I just got my butt fired. You're coming for dinner? No. I go, well, I'm already on the plane. We're in flight. I am coming. He said, well, let's see if we get together the next morning. My point with David is, if this was CBS, there would have been a week's worth of meetings. What are you going to do with Jimmy? What are you going to pay him? Why do you think you can hire him? It goes on and on. At other companies. With Hill, it's just check in every once in a while. Wow. And one final, David Hill, love that man's story. I had reached out to Michael Strahan. There was a Miami Super Bowl. The Giants weren't in it. And I called him and I said, are you going to be at the Super Bowl? He said, yeah. And I said, you going to be there with your agent? He says, yeah. I go, I got an idea. I got to go to Hill, but here's what I want to do. Let's meet in Miami. And here's the deal, Stray. I'm going to tell you what you're going to do when you retire from the playing field and how much money we're going to pay you. And we will do a contract that doesn't take effect until you retire, whether it's 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, whatever. But I got to go to Hill first. So I go to David. I say, David, we got a meeting with Strahan and his agent in Miami. And I'm going to offer Strahan a job. And David goes, is he retiring? And I go, well, actually, he's not. The contract is going to take effect once he does retire. So Hill goes, so let me get this straight. We're going to do a contract for a lot of money, and we don't know when it kicks in. And I go, exactly. And he goes, why? Why now? And I said, here, it's real basic. If we wait until he retires, CBS is going to come after him. They love the Giants. ABC, NBC, and ESPN will go after him. It's going to cost us more to sign him at that point, and we may not get him. I want to get him. And David goes, God bless, let's do it.
And the career that he has had ever since. You saw in Strahan. What did you see from him?
Here. A year later, the Giants, mediocre all season, and now they get hot in the playoffs. The Super Bowl is in Arizona. The Giants are in the Super Bowl. And Strahan is in the Super Bowl. A few weeks after the Giants win the Super Bowl, Stray is out here with his mom and dad, military family. We're at dinner with my wife. And my wife says to Strahan, Michael, you get concerned about long-term health issues the longer you play. How old are you? It just starts in on him. Michael's father goes, Michael, listen to her. She's making some sense here. A couple of weeks go by, Strahan calls me, and he goes, Ed, I can't believe this. The Giants just offered me a 1-year deal at $7 million. And I told them, I'm retiring. So I guess you own my ass because I'm part of Fox Sports. The deal is in.
Wow. How much did your wife play a part in tipping off Michael to say, maybe it's time to move on?
You know what? He still tells the story. I don't know why he picked that time, why he thought, other than winning a Super Bowl, it's a nice way to go out. But whatever it was, it's been a great ride for everybody. And what was perfect for me, I felt that Terry, Howie, and Jimmy had been together since day one, 1994, that we needed to get someone who was more current coming off the playing field. That certainly was Stray. I wanted an African American, if possible. That certainly was Stray. And here's the thing, that if you're a high school kid and you just moved into a new neighborhood and you're a high school senior, and there's one group of guys that are the guys, it's hard for the guy that comes in to get to be a part of that group. It takes a special kind of kid to get the other guys, the A guys, to say, hey, he's a pretty cool guy. We like him. It was sensitive as to who we put with Terry, Howie, and Jimmy. And Stray was perfect for that.
How long did it take for all the new moving parts to massage those together when you brought in Stray to make the production as smooth as it looks today and has been for so many years?
Well, we would have a spring gathering of the pregame guys. Acts, we ended up in Vegas for most of them. And we had to deal with Strahan, and we're at our April getaway, but I haven't told anyone that Strahan's joining the show. But I brought it up at that spring meeting. I won't say who it was who said to me, Ed, are we getting another half hour? Is this going to be now an hour and a half pregame show? And I said, no, I'd love to, but we can't get the time. It's still an hour. And that individual said, well, how is there going to be enough time for us to talk if we're adding another guy? At which point I said, do you trust me? You trust me starting in 1994? Hill and I are the producers. We'll make it work. Ackerson will make it work. And of course, it did work.
Over the course of your career, and we're joined by Ed Goren, I'm Bryan Fenley, you've had pushback, you've had resistance to your ideas, but you've been so strong in your convictions, in knowing what is right, your compass as to what is going to lead to good things. Oh, go for it.
It gets back to David Hill. If your boss creates an environment where it's not a terrible thing to fail, it's a terrible thing if you're not pushing the envelope and trying. So we had a climate where if it didn't work, Hill and I were famous for looking at each other and saying, that sucked. Let's get to the bar and come up with a better idea, as opposed to other places where you have to defend yourself. What were you thinking? How stupid was that? One thing about Hill and me, we did a lot of stupid things, but most of them worked.
What's the bar that generated the most state-of-the-art ideas from you and David? And what do you think the bartender thought listening in, eavesdropping on these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, that was what we were trying to put together, and David and I agreed to it. And we were going to be entertaining. Very important to be entertaining. I mean, all you needed to know about what is this Fox Sports going to be? What is it going to look like? What is it going to be? Our first show, our first NFL Sunday regular season, we opened the show with Terry Bradshaw riding a horse through Beverly Hills into our studio. Didn't need to know much more than that we were going to be different.
Ed, let me leave you with this last question. Ed Goren is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. The visions that you had when you first got to Fox and what you wanted to do and what you were able to pull off, to see where Fox is now, to where you thought it could be when you first joined the network and first got things moving. What's similar? What's different? How did your initial view of what this could be, how was that in relation to what it has become today?
Well, today it's become a big business and a great business. And uh, to this day, the fact that Terry, Howie, and Jimmy have been there since day one. I mean, I kid them every season. God, you guys are still cashing Rupert's checks. It's amazing. But that's what Fox Sports is today, and they're doing a great job. Back in 1994, the Fox network was this small operation. We, Fox Sports, internally were the stars of the company. Between the movie division, the primetime network, we were the new kids on the block. We were the kids. Pat Summerall, John Madden gave us credibility. Terry, Howie, Jimmy, and James Brown created the personality of what Fox Sports was about. And to this day, there's a Fox Sports attitude. And one thing that we left out, which would have been a terrible thing if I didn't go back to it, the Fox box. That was unbelievable. It made us different. It made us controversial. Dick Ebersol, love him to this day, swore year one when we had the Fox box, he would never put that kind of graphic on a game. It was a difference maker. David had used this for soccer in Europe, which is a little crazy because the score doesn't change very often in soccer. But in my very first sit down with David, I talked about the score of other games and of this game. And David said, well, I got it. I did it in Europe. And David, there were a lot of times where David loved to say, I did this in Europe, trust me. Half the time he was full of shit. He done it in Europe. He wants to do it here.
Yes.
Man, they were great times.
So many great times and so many great stories shared on this conversation platform. Ed Goren, I'm Bryan Fenley. Ed, thanks for doing this, man. I would love to do this again sometime. I had a blast talking about your life and your story. And I know a lot of people are going to love hearing this and with everything you've done in this business.
Well, thank you. And anytime it gets me out of the house, keeps the marriage going.